Hello and welcome back to another game review. My name is Syken and today we are going to dive into the game review of Hard West 2. I'm doing game reviews on the regular, particularly of games that I have completed, and Hard West 2 is not an exception. Before we dive into the review though, I would like to give a word of advice, because I am not reviewing games like the Modern Reviewer where everything is a 9 or a 10 out of 10. Quite the contrary. For me, an average game is a 5 to 6 out of 10, a good game is a 7 out of 10, an excellent game is an 8 out of 10, a game that could compete for Game of the Year would be a 9 out of 10, and a game that is truly genre defining would be a 10 out of 10, so don't feel too let down if the game that you like isn't ranging up in the 9s or 10s out there. With that being said, let's dive into Hard West 2 and see what the game can deliver. Let's dive into lore and background. Lore and background is typically a category where you're looking for a consistent world, a well-narrated background story that is compelling, easy to follow. For those who are interested in the story, there should be a little bit more nuggets and bits of information here and there. And Hard West 2 definitely delivers on that. I would give it an excellent in this particular realm. Even more compelling if you think about that, contrary to titles like Aliens Dark Descent or the many Warhammer 40k franchise branch outs, this game didn't have a full plethora of books to draw from, but rather its own story that they created in Hard West 1. Basically a Wild West horror genre where the supernatural is meeting a lawless Wild Western scenario. And Hard West 2 certainly doubles down on that. I found myself during the period of Hard West, when playing it, to always be intrigued by the types of conversations that were happening. The story felt fluent, no repetitions or unnecessary plots left or right. It was just a good story in the Wild West. On top of that, each of the characters are very well fleshed out, whether you do have Jin, the leader of the gang, Flynn, the occult lady of the gang, Laughing Deer, the slightly brutal Native American with a shady history, or many of the other characters that you can unlock. The game certainly delivers on that, and I would say that's one of the strong points of the game. Which brings us to graphic and GUI, and this is where Hard West 2 does a good job without reinventing the wheel. The game itself has two different scenarios. One is an overworld scenario where you're basically traveling the Wild West with certain points of interest, and you can mix and match them in any form that you like. Very similar to the first game, a bit different. The closest resemblance is potentially Wastelands if you haven't played the first title, and you will be greeted by sometimes quite explicit graphics as well as a lot of just rich storyline all around. From a graphical perspective, the artwork is fine, the models are okay, but a lot of the work is being done by the graphic card and not necessarily by incredibly detailed textures. The animations of the characters are good, which you will also see in the actual battle scenes, and they are generally speaking fluent. However, there are a couple of limitations. And these limitations typically show on the tactical layer, which is the second part of the game. The tactical layer comes whenever you're entering a tactical battle, and naturally it requires a little bit more, shall we say, focus on the graphical aspects, whilst the strategy layer gets away with a bit more artwork overall. So on the tactical layer, it is quite clear that the game hasn't been a AAA budgeted game. Whilst the characters are decently modeled, you can see most of the textures are working out well, and the characters also move and behave like they should. They are nowhere near as polished as, for instance, a game like Gears Tactics. You can see it in the interaction whenever someone is, for instance, climbing up, moving over obstacles. you oftentimes see that the animation is there, but it might be slightly delayed and sometimes doesn't really fit the bill. Also, the actual combat moves are quite repetitive, which tells you that there is really just one combat move that has been implemented, so the width and variety might not be there. Finally, at least for me, a slight turn off had been that the characters sometimes are just hitting empty spots. An example there would be Laughing Deer, the melee character, who, once he killed someone and really wants to finish him and drive home the message, hits multiple times into thin air. Now, all of that can be overlooked. It is not a massive problem for the game, but it is what differentiates this game from, say, more polished and refined titles. Modern graphic cards, specifically for tactical games, luckily offer so many support and aid systems that as long as your textures are somewhat fine, you can get away with a lot of it. I will shortly talk about the graphical user interface as well, which I think deserves a credit on its own. I judge graphical user interface on their intuitivity, where someone who is new to the game basically gets an understanding of what's going on. That is delivered in Hard West 2. It shows you all of the necessary information, preview of health deducted, preview of the amount of action points that you need, although some of it is somewhat hidden and you need to first of all find it. I think it would have been better to even highlight it more, make it larger, blinking, or rearrange the graphical user interface as well. A couple of smaller topics specifically for those who like to play with mouse and keyboard. I think that the M&K support here isn't on par with games like XCOM, where you can simply mix and match your keys. That isn't always the case in Hard West 2. Let's move on to the next category, which brings us to sounds and sound effects, and this is another strong suit of Hard West 2. I don't know what it is with Western games like Desperados, Hard West, or Wastelands, but they just get the sounds right. Whether it is the sound effects of the guns, the supporting sound effects when you are entering and boarding a train and trying to rob it, where the footsteps of the horse, the train sounds, and the gun sounds just come together, or just the incredibly catchy and well done background music. The game just offers a wide variety and depth of it. I would say from a sound perspective, one of the better games that I've played for a long period of time, and certainly something that I will remember. There are, however, bits and pieces that still could be done better. If I compare it to absolute genius games in this category like Wasteland 3, then I would say the lack of full voice support with all of the voice lines was noticeable. I suggest maybe AI voicing or just using community support for good voice actors, but many of the dialogues would have been fleshed out a little bit more with just a richer amount of voices. Also, a great narrator would have been good, because a lot of the narration when you are on the strategic world would just benefit from a dark voice that is reading through it and would make the experience even richer. That, however, all is kind of taking a backseat when you look at what Hard West 2 has to offer in terms of sounds, and that's a lot. Therefore, 9 out of 10. Let's move on to the next category. Alright, entering tactical gameplay, the section where everything that is gameplay related will find its mentioning. And this is a mixed bag. I would say the game overall delivers well on tactical gameplay, but there are a lot of howevers, and I want to explain that. So let's start with the strength of tactical gameplay. For starters, Hard West finds itself in the same genre as XCOM, tactical games with a limited amount of squad. The squad size in this game is 4, which I think is an excellent decision. I personally prefer games with a more limited squad size because it doesn't make it too much of a slog. Then the other aspect of it is the abilities and uniqueness of all of the characters, and Hard West definitely does have its depth here. You can choose out of overall 6 characters. At one mission you even get a bonus character, but generally 6 characters with quite unique abilities, ranging from pure damage dealers over just melee characters, over support characters that can use live transfer, all the way to combat specialists that can rearrange the battlefield. Hard West has it all. You want it, Hard West names it, and you can basically knock yourself out with, say, the width and variety. Since the game itself is set in a fantasy world, there is definitely a lot of breadth of characters. So that is the positive of it. I would say the individual gun battles in particular are also quite fun. I always enjoyed myself when fighting through hordes of henchmen, and the enemy, say, variance and breadth for the 20 odd missions that you are playing is sufficient. It is not anything to write home about, but it is definitely sufficient. Now, what is about the limitations of the tactical gameplay though? So what are the downsides, you ask? Thank you for asking that, Mr. Invisible Strawman. I was just about to explain it. A couple of them. Hard West 2 basically refines the system of Hard West 1, which went away from the original idea of a pure hit-based system and instead used luck. The idea in Hard West 1 was you're being lucky and therefore won't be hit for a couple of times, but at some point after you have been lucky so and so often, you will automatically get hit. That had its own advantages and disadvantages, as you can imagine. Hard West 2 modifies that system by still coming back to hit chances, modifying them with cover, but still retaining luck as a factor. Whenever you're missing, you're obtaining luck, and that will essentially make follow-up attacks easier to hit. So far so good. I think that part of the system is really well done. The game itself, however, then has a quite strict regimen where you need to fight through hordes of enemies. You're typically outnumbered 2 to 1, 3 to 1, and the way that the game balances this is a system called Bravado. Bravado as a system is interesting because it allows you to regain all of your action points the moment that you hit and kill an enemy. Not hit, you need to kill the enemy. So that creates so-called Bravado chains, where you can have kill chains that go on and on and on. And whilst the idea of Bravado is nice on paper, it makes the whole game quite predictable. So the tactical depth shrinks to basically calculating a simple math equation where you're always looking to reduce the hit points to a degree where the follow-up strike will essentially kill the enemy. While there is a bit of variance in it, because you can critically strike and you cannot always foresee that, the core of it is quite straightforward. If you are attacking an enemy with 100% hit chance and you have so and so many attacks, then you can simply calculate whether or not you get him down. And that is how the game is intended to be played. You want to essentially maw through all of the enemies as fast as possible by calculating who is setting them up and who is finishing them. That was fun for a few missions, but soon I found myself with the question, is there more to it? Is there a little bit more depth to all of that? And the answer is unfortunately no, and that is the shallowness or the weakness of this concept, where the game from a tactical perspective is a little bit flat. Other games that have more depth to it will excel in this category. Hard West is great for a recreational story experience. I would very much recommend it in that, but if you are an ambitious tactical gamer, the game oftentimes feels a little bit too easy, as long as you can calculate and properly do addition and subtraction. Even though I played through it the first time, I beat most of the challenges quite handily. which also tells you, and I played it on Nightmare Plus difficulty, which tells you that the game itself was maybe not designed with the right amount of challenge in mind. Take it for what it's worth, I won't deduct any points for that, it's just an observation. And that neatly brings us to replayability. Given the whole bravado nature of the game and the abilities, there is a limited amount of replayability. Where is it coming from? For starters, there are meaningful quest decisions throughout the game that will influence not only who of your posse you will be friends with, but also which outcomes you have to expect. So I commend the game for that variety because it helps with the replayability. The second replayability comes from simply forcing 4 out of 6 posse members. Although I rotated, I still found myself wondering if I could have a different outcome with a different setup of characters. That being said, the posse setup will very much influence your game experience, so I can see a moderate amount of replayability. The replayability, however, is negatively influenced by the bravado nature of the game. Once you understand how to set up and kill enemies and you quote-unquote found the right setup, then you can just execute the turns over and over and over. And whilst there is a bit of RNG in it, the game doesn't have the depth to deliver a true replayability. What could be done better would be something like proper seeding and dynamical map design like you have it in XCOM 2, or just simply random missions, but that would potentially not fit the storyline nature and would have been way more effort driven. The game doesn't have that level of depth, but it works quite well with what it had created. If you're interested in that storyline, I can see a second playthrough coming out, but I most certainly would not foresee you play this more than 2 or 3 times in a row. Which brings us to the question, is Hard West 2 worth it? And my answer is yes, it is a good, yet not excellent game. Hard West 2 excels in a really intriguing lore and background, in sound effects that are catchy, good graphics, and a very fun tactical gameplay experience. Whilst it does lack the depth and breadth of other games, it still delivers and can be a nice distraction for someone wanting to explore a horror Wild West scenario. I would definitely recommend the game and hope that there is a DLC or expansion to it. The franchise has taken an uplift towards Hard West 1. I think the developers have learned their lesson, but there is still a bit to go in order to take on big rivals or juggernauts of the genre like the XCOM franchise. Do you agree with what I had to say? Did I nail it? Leave a comment down below and let me know what you think of Hard West 2. I hope you enjoyed the review and see you all in the next one. Bye bye.